Empire.
Hello and welcome to my podcast. Today, I'm joined by USA Today's Mike Jones as we discuss the Washington football team. Can they ever get it going under owner Dan Snyder? I love Mike's perspective because he knows his place and he's also covered the rest of the NFL. So he offers a unique look. By nature, I'm more of an optimist and always think there's a way to make any situation work. It's kind of an outlook I learned growing up for various reasons. But is there hope here? In legitimate hope? In some ways, yeah, sure. In others, relies on ownership. There are bad dudes and bad owners all over sports. Some of them win. How? Great ownership impacts building a consistent winner more than a team that can win every couple years. The latter could depend on, say, drafting a quarterback like a Kyler Murray and then being able to make it work. So there are all situations where teams have won, but there are 2 decades of failure or a lack of success here. So Mike and I discuss the situation. You can follow Mike on Twitter at @ByMikeJones and read his work in USA Today. He does a great job covering the NFL and offering insight and opinions on breaking news in particular. You, of course, can read my work on ESPN.com and listen to my opinions, well, here. I'm also on Instagram at JohnKeimESPN. Before I play my conversation, one note on a transaction that happened Tuesday, the release of kicker Chris Blewett. I never liked signing him, and it's not about whether or not I like Dustin Hopkins. I saw the same inconsistencies that everybody else did. But it's all about when you make a move, you can't separate and say, well, releasing Dustin Hopkins was great, but it was the guy they signed was bad. No, it's a one-for-one transaction. So the transaction was not a good one. So if you want to get rid of Dustin Hopkins, that's fine. But who are you replacing him with? And you did so with a guy that hadn't kicked in a game since 2016. That was a massive gamble. Did it cost him a game? Well, who knows? He had 2 kicks blocked versus Denver in a game where Washington moved the ball at the end and perhaps would have been in position to attempt a game-winning kick rather than try for the end zone. But we also know that as points are scored, games play out differently, teams react differently, so you never know. But those misses had an impact on that game. Also, anyone who thinks that cutting Hopkins was going to send a message to other players, I think you're kind of fooling yourselves. Cutting an inconsistent kicker, again, we all saw the same thing. It doesn't move the needle for other players like some other moves may have done. Big moves with position players send a message, whether it's a benching or a move or something. Washington gambled in looking for a more consistent kicker, and it failed. At least one thing where I give them credit, they moved on quickly. But now we're back in a situation where the team is hoping for a young leg to develop. Joey Sly, whom they signed, had he been available at the time of Hopkins' release and they signed him, I'd have understood that move a lot better. Sly's stats are kind of Hopkins-esque, not quite as good, but he's still young in his career. He's young, perhaps can grow as a kicker. Hopkins is what he is at this point. That's why I say, looking for another guy, that was smart. You had to. We saw the same thing. He had not changed as a kicker. The inconsistencies were going to be there. But the Blewett move never made sense. And again, you cannot separate the two because this is who they cut Hopkins for. But I think right now they're in a better spot. Again, a young guy that they're familiar with, that maybe they can grow and develop and see him gain the kind of consistency they absolutely needed from Hopkins. All right, after this break, I'll be back with Mike Jones from USA Today as we discuss Washington's ownership situation. Can they still win here? Welcome back. Now here's my conversation with Mike Jones from USA Today. All right, welcoming back my good friend Mike Jones. And before we get going, I always have to ask if you've been able to smoke anything, grill anything, do anything that has been fun. I at least had a bye week where I really didn't have a bye week, but technically it was. But it gave me the chance on the weekend to at least grill some brats, do some pork loin in the smoker. Have you had a chance to do anything?
2 weeks ago, I did the jerk chicken recipe that I told you about.
The world's best jerk chicken recipe.
Yes, right. I hadn't done it in a while, and I had a Tuesday, and that's where I'm home And so I had to go on the road on Saturday. So Saturday morning, I put it all in the, Friday, I soaked it, did the brine. Then Saturday, I soaked it in the paste, the jerk paste. And so then Monday and then Tuesday, I popped it out, threw it on the grill. And it was great. That has been the most I've done. I think it was a few weeks before that, I did some ribs. Have not done a pork shoulder in a while, just because it's been so hard time-wise to go back. But I did get a new smoker, and so I was happy. I wasn't happy my neighbor moved, but old guy who bought a smoker, and he was like, I bought this thing and I never really use it. And he was moving to Alabama, and he said, "You want this thing for $75?" And I was
Whoa.
like, "Yes, I will take it." And it's I'm like, this guy doesn't realize an Oklahoma Joe smoker is not $75. But
is it an offset?
Are you sure that's all you want? Yes, it is. And I said, "Are you sure that's all you want for it?" He's like, "I just sold my house. I just made a lot of money. You can take it." So
wow.
Fantastic. So I did ribs then. That was, I think, like August. So I was happy with that. And then did, like I said, the jerk chicken.
Cool.
Really
that is what I also have, is the Oklahoma Joes. And so it's worked well for me. So good. That's a good deal, man. So let's get back to football, or start with football. And I do want to take a look. I want to ask your opinion on some other broader topics, but with Washington starting the second half, of course, 2-6, this place, but you also cover the league. So I always like your opinion on these things. What is there a feeling around the NFL, if you even talk to people about this place, about what's going on? Do they have the right people in place to get this place possibly turned around at some point?
Yeah, I did a thing a couple weeks ago. Actually, was that last week? Man, I tell you, it's like everything seems so long ago, but it actually was last week, about the biggest disappointments of the first half of the season. And I checked with them, multiple people, multiple teams, and three guys mentioned either Washington's defense or Chase Young as some of their most disappointing aspects of the first half of the season, and really just kind of scratching their head as to why he is not playing at a higher level, why the defense as a whole isn't playing at a higher level, because everybody expected, they had a really good defense, and the questions might be at quarterback, but the defense is going to keep them in games, so they'll be there close, and maybe they can eke out some wins here and there, with if they can have some solid quarterback play. Didn't need a world beater, but that defense has not been there like it was expected. And, there are some questions. A couple of people have said, they don't have a real GM calling the shots. Maybe somebody to kind of overrule Ron on some things here and there, and also, does he have anybody to really challenge him, or are they a bunch of yes men around him? And so that's been the question, kind of the feel when I talked to people about what this first half of the season has been. Can they turn it around? I don't know, man. It is still, perplexing why the defense is playing the way it is. And then also, you're not going to go out there. I mean, the quarterback situation isn't going to change. When Fitzpatrick, when he gets back, maybe that'll help, stabilize things a little bit. But there's still a lot of questions, a lot of issues that I don't know if it can be fixed in a half of a season.
Right. And I'm not even talking about fixing it this season. And I'm not sold that Fitzpatrick will make his way back. We still have to learn that. I would, if I were a Washington fan, I'd probably brace for the opposite, but we don't know at this point. There's still more to learn, but I think you just kind of look at it that way. And then, but going forward in the future, that's more what because this year is going to be tough. I think they need to play well down the stretch to reestablish themselves. But they're really, you at some point you kind of start looking ahead a little bit, and that's why I wonder: do they have the right parts in place to get it not just now, but going forward in 2022 and beyond?
Yeah, that's a question. And the problem when you look at the quarterback position is, and a couple people said this to me too, it would have made sense if they drafted a quarterback this year, even if they didn't play him, but then they could develop him and then be ready to turn things over to him next year. But they didn't do that. And so, they're back right where they were, going to have to find another veteran quarterback, you would think, to plug in there. The problem is what veteran quarterback's going to want to come here? If a guy has, people ask me about Deshaun Watson, they ask about Aaron Rodgers. It's like, if a guy's got a no trade clause, do you really think he's going to waive it for the Washington football team? Which, if you're Deshaun Watson, you're at a dysfunctional organization, you want to be better. Why do you want to come to another organization that's also dysfunctional? Rodgers isn't going to want to come here. So trading for a top level guy isn't going to work. Now, could Tua be available? Do they like him enough? I don't know. So maybe this second or third tier type of veteran, it's going to be a while. And the problem is that rebuilding in the NFL, it used to be maybe a 3 to 5 year project, but now it's expected to be like a 2-year type of thing. And, Ron seems like he's suddenly expanding the timeline when he's talking, and, maybe trying to buy himself some more time. But I don't know. Again, the questions are, from a front office perspective, do they have the right people? Do they have people that will challenge Ron and make some tough but smart decisions? They do have some pieces, but there's going to have to be changes on defense. I don't know. Del Rio does a lot. Some people say, he's coaching the team and Ron's kind of the CEO. But his defense isn't working right now. I don't know if there's a change there coming. I haven't heard that, but you just look at this unit and the way it's underperforming, and you have to sense that there's got to be some changes.
And I think you bring up, because you brought up Chase Young too, when people talk about him, what is it that we know? I know what I'm seeing, and I know, like, when I talk to people here and all that, but I'm curious what outsiders see that is different from him than what they were expecting. Is there anything in particular they point to? And I think you talk about changes, like that's one change, but I don't know, is that Del Rio or is that Sam Mills, a D-line coach, or is there something else they can do there? But just with Chase, what are some of the areas, if they got specific with you, that they are disappointed in?
The two of the guys were kind of just like, what's going on there? I don't understand. Why didn't he not? Well, one guy did say it seems like he's more hesitant. He doesn't seem like he goes all out. He said there's a lot of extra footwork in there, instead of just like getting right up there.
Agree 1,000%.
Right. Didn't get another really counter move that it looks like he's really comfortable with. When you didn't know him, they just had college tape. Maybe and the thing is, it was really the second half of the season when he really came on last year. Now that there's film on him and you know how to defend him a little bit, what does he throw back at them? And there doesn't seem to be that there. And so I think that might be one thing that's hurting him. But again, that was one guy who said that the other guys were more so. The other guy who named Chase Young said, I don't understand why he didn't take a leap. And the third guy was the one who just said the defense as a whole is the real disappointment.
And my thing too, going forward for them, is if the defense doesn't get solved, the issues are far greater than just quarterback. And if you're a Washington fan, that's not what you want, because it means that whatever they're doing has not worked at all. Right. With Mayhew and Marty Herney, and you said maybe not a real GM of those two. What do you hear about them maybe from others in the league? Anything in particular?
Well, I know that Martin is respected. I just got the list of minority front office and coaching candidates that the league vets and recommends to teams for consideration for GM and head coaching jobs, and Martin's name is on the list.
Right. He's been an experienced guy, and he's smart.
Right. But again, I think that the questions people have is, are those guys strong enough to challenge Ron, or has the setup been, hey, this is my show, you guys do this for me, I'll make the last call? Does Ron accept? And nobody said he doesn't, but they just wonder, like, does he accept pushback? Does Marty or does Martin have the ability to be like, no, Ron, this is not working, we've got to go in this direction? And would he listen? Or are they kind of just deferring to him, they give a little input, and then that was just the question. But again, people respect him. He's again, like you said, he's got experience, he's got respect around the league, but it's just the dynamic there of, okay, you've got basically two former GMs here kind of sharing GM duties and referring to the head coach, whereas maybe it's better if you have one guy that works hand in hand with the head coach. I don't know.
I also want, that coach-centric model, which was bigger years ago than it is now. I always wonder about the effectiveness of it. And is that something you hear too? Like that model, is it? And again, like, here's the other thing, Mike. If you go out and get a good quarterback, things can look differently than they do now. And so that we're looking at all these reasons why, and it could be just as simple as you get a good quarterback. I mean, maybe a great quarterback solves all these issues, but so sometimes you can, we're looking at all these reasons why. It may be a simple answer, but do you hear about the coach-centric model much?
No, because not with this case. It's just that people are like, well, Ron hasn't really had big personnel say, the ultimate personnel say before, and this time he does. And, with some coaches, they have a hard time of balancing looking at the long-term picture and the immediate picture, but Ron doesn't seem to have that problem.
I think he's actually pretty good
with a long-term picture. And I remember sitting down with him at training camp, and I said, why didn't you guys make a different or a more dramatic move at quarterback or draft somebody? And he was like, I felt like when you looked at what we had last year, we just really needed a game manager. As he's continuing to assemble, he kind of wants to follow that model like Buffalo, where they set the table, but they set the table one year and then they got Josh Allen and continued setting the table. I think he wants the roster to be as strong as possible, then drop the kid in there. But it kind of sounded complacent to me, like, well, we really just needed a game manager. Why are you just going for a game manager? Why not be better or try to be better than that? Because, and again, if you wanted Fitzpatrick to be your game manager this year, why not have somebody that you're developing for next year? Because next year you're going to have to find somebody, and you were hoping that you could contend for the division again. So that means you weren't going to have a top pick to be able to get, but, there was Mac Jones at 15 and he's doing pretty well. So you never know. But,
and it's, I know part of it was not wanting to give up too much for the future to move up to get a Justin Fields. Because you would have had to go up to 11 to get him, or even Mac Jones, but it sounded like the Patriots were kind of intent on grabbing him. So I don't know what would have worked or what wouldn't have worked. But that I think was always part of the discussion. But I also think that they felt like between the quarterbacks they had, not anticipating Ryan Fitzpatrick getting hurt in the opener, but that the defense would be better and would allow these quarterbacks to play a certain role and keep them in games and let the defense maybe win games. So it was a lot of it was dependent on that defense looking good. And so looking at the quarterback classes, you brought, Watson and Rodgers, and I agree, like Watson would not, everything I've heard he would not waive his no trade clause to come here. Rodgers, it sounds like Denver would be the place. What have you heard about like a guy like Mitch Trubisky? Because he's with guys that Ron knows and trusts, and Brandon Beane and Sean McDermott. Have you heard anything about him and maybe how? It's hard because he hasn't played. So what do we know?
Yeah, we don't really know, and I haven't started talking that far down.
It's a little bit early for that for you.
Yeah, but as far as I think that the guys that are on that list was Tyrod Taylor, Teddy Bridgewater, Jameis Winston, Cam Newton, which isn't coming here, Ryan Fitzpatrick, Taysom Hill, Mariota. Mariota is one that this past offseason I had wondered if that would be an intriguing option for them. With Trubisky, the problem is, like you said, is you just don't know. He showed some signs of having some potential, and maybe didn't seem like he was quite supported right with Matt Nagy and the coaching there. You just kind of wonder. But again, that's really kind of rolling the dice on somebody, So again, and I haven't had a whole lot of free agency talks yet.
It's way too early. This is a Washington reporter looking way ahead right now, and I get that. And I know even like with a guy like Mitch, you're probably going to still want to draft somebody too, because you don't know if he's going to hit, and it may just be a one-year guy. I still, even at the end when Mitch would have good games in Chicago, I kind of look at how it came about, and I'm like, there's still an inconsistency there with mechanics and all that, where this game it looks good, but the next game it's going to be off because the mechanics lead to inconsistency. So we'll see. But again, another decision or another discussion for down the road. But the other thing I'm curious too, like, obviously Washington fans, do not like this owner and are convinced they'll never win with this owner. And so far, in 2 decades, they've been right. But you've covered, there are teams around the league that, how much worse is he as an owner compared to some other teams that you cover that are actually now winning? Is there that big a difference? And if so, what is it?
I mean, there's a lot of bad owners around the league. Look, Detroit has got a bad ownership group.
But they also lose. That's not the example Washington fans want to hear.
Right. That's what I'm saying. There's a lot of bad ones. But there's not bad people. There's been a lot of bad stuff that, as people, then that's the reason why people really are convinced about Snyder that it won't. But also just the way he does things. I mean, there's just never, most teams follow a traditional, like, have a real GM, right, type of thing, and there's never kind of been that desire to have a real one here. It's been so weird. How does Snyder compare? Look, they kind of change, from year to year on, they want to spend big, then they want to be, financially, conservative and build to the draft. And I don't know, I just think that there's just never a clear vision, because he doesn't have a real football guy in his ear. I mean, he had Bruce Allen, and Bruce Allen wasn't really a real football guy.
Which is shocking to say considering his background, but that you're right.
He was an agent, and worked in some front offices, but had no experience as a team architect. And they haven't wanted to bring in that type of guy. Even Scott McLuhan, he was a very talented scout, but he wasn't an experienced GM. So I don't know. I don't know what would ever change with this team.
Well, I think it's almost like you have to get fortunate with some picks and hit on some picks.
Yeah.
And hope that he just stays in the background with some of these things, because that's where I think, if you get fortunate and you built the right way, because I'm not blaming Dan Snyder for this season. Like, he's not the reason why, right, the defense is underachieving and all that. But I am curious, though, because when you look at what's going on here, and again, if he's going to stay as owner, is there any what is the level of hope for a Washington fan that this will ever change? And so that's why I wonder, you look at the Bidwells were a terrible ownership group for a long time.
Right.
Then you hit on some things, but you also get Kyler Murray and you make the right coaching hire. And now suddenly you look what you're doing, and, you look at the Niners and they look like they were going somewhere, and now they're not. And, right, so it's just, it's a hard thing. And is it just because of him that they can't get a turnaround, or is it because of some other circumstances?
I don't think it's just because of him, but just for whatever reason, it is. One guy said, "Man, it's never just about football."
Correct.
And they have football people in place, and Ron's having to spend time answering questions about non-football stuff. And there are distractions throughout the building about non-football stuff.
Yeah.
I don't know what hope is. Like, you can hope that, look, they had RG3, so they got what looked like the right pick. They had the right offense for him. That rookie year was huge.
Yeah.
Then he gets hurt, and then that causes the friction with Shanahan, and then Shanahan was out. So it looked like, okay, they got the franchise quarterback. There's hope, and then something bad always happens. But you just have to hope that things can fall into place and you can start building something here. And I know that's the hope every year. I really just don't even know what to tell people.
It's funny, though, because you bring up, and this is something I would tell people, hear this all the time, that, a philosophy. I've never felt like there was an organizational blueprint or philosophy from the ownership group. Now, no. I think you can talk to Ron Rivera, and he's got a vision in mind, and he's got a blueprint in mind about how things need to go. And that's all good. And I think that's where, we've seen good coaches come in here with the right way of doing things, and it hasn't always worked for whatever variety of reasons. But I've never felt like the ownership group has had that. This is how you build things. It's always been fire, aim, ready. And rather than that, I believe in this, this, and this. And I remember we had to do an assignment one time for ESPN where I'm like, what's the organizational credo? And it's just win. Or no, we want to win. We want to win championships. Well, that's not a credo. That's a desire, but it's not a credo. Like, how do you get, we believe in, you look at the Steelers have a clear organizational belief. and it's why they've maintained success for a long time. So that's always been one of the things that I've felt was lacking here, and which it sounds like you would agree with that.
No, exactly. Yeah, I mean, ownership.
Yes.
It's funny. I mean, but like, look, he's been the owner for 2 decades now, and he doesn't look like he's learned anything. Hasn't learned how to do this thing better. And there have been many people, many great football minds brought into the building, and they never get to see it through. And so patience is definitely not the credo. Then there was a time with Bruce Allen and them, they were probably too patient.
Just a little bit. And they gave Jay 6 years. So
yeah, it's really, it's kind of, and again, like, I've grown up in this area. I've seen all this stuff, I mean, it's just like, and it's hard to get your mind around. And people want to say that, I'm a hater or whatever, but like, it feels like it's only here. And people who have left this organization and gone to I was talking to one guy who left this organization and is now working for another team in the division. And he said, you don't realize how bad and how bad it is until you get out. Like, you knew you're keeping your head down, you're working, you knew you're dealing with some stuff, but he's like, there's a lot of distractions that make it hard for even the football people to do their job. And so until those distractions are gone, I don't know, what changes.
And I think one of the things that would benefit them is if he's able to stay away. If they just say, would have been better for the NFL to just say you're done for a year, just stay away from the building and all that. And the other thing that I think they needed to do too is start taking care of employees better, just with the pay. And like, I would hear from scouts who were there, like, who said, I liked working there, they just didn't pay. And you look at the level of pay for other jobs in that building compared to around the league, and it usually is lower than everywhere else. And this is a big market, an expensive place. And they, so that was always something. I think they've worked to correct some of that. I don't know to what level yet, but that was more so in the past. And that it cost them losing some good people and caused frustration as well. So, there are, and that's funny because, like I always say, there are good football minds there now. There still are. It's just, will they be able to see it through? But the key goes back to that quarterback position. And can they get that guy? And so I think that will be, because again, Dan Snyder's not going anywhere. So you work around the parameters and like, all right, this isn't going to change unless something comes out in congressional hearings, which I don't know what year, but I don't expect anything to change at this point based on what we know. But short of that, then it's like, well, how do you then have success if this is a guy who hasn't had any success for 2 decades? How can you still then go out and have that? It comes back to quarterback. So,
and they've tried every route. They've tried the high pick. They've tried the trades for big name veterans, and they've tried journeymen, and they've tried everything.
Well, and that's why I feel bad for these fans, because I know there was a portion they're like, well, maybe Taylor Heineke will be Kurt Warner. He's not, and that's okay. Like, if he's just a backup, they found a backup. That's good, but that's what but I think they've been reduced to that because nothing else has really worked. You had a guy in, like you said, Robert. Like, we thought he'd be here for 10 years being a star, and then Kirk, it never timed up, and I don't even know. If they had kept him, what would have been different? Would they still have just been a 500 team with him, given the cost? And then you don't exactly have the same team around him. You can't just plug Kirk in here and say, this is what it would have been like, because they wouldn't have the same team. Wouldn't have had Chase Young.
And he's got a better roster than in Minnesota, and he still isn't,
right. Yeah. So I don't want to rewrite history on that one. That would have been once the initial offer was made, that thing was done, and you were never going to sign him. But there's a whole road we can go down on that one, and it's like, it's not worth it because it's not relevant, and it wasn't going to happen. So I don't know, Mike. It's and my job is not to provide hope for fans, but if you do look and say, this is a situation, how can you still have success? And are there other organizations that have had success with really bad owners? And the answer is yes, but you've got to have some level of luck. But good ownership always makes the difference in the end.
Yeah, you're right.
Last thing, this is not Washington, but Kyle Shanahan. What do you think is going on there? Because, this is his 5th year. This will be a 4th losing season if it continues.
Right. That's the thing is like, man, and that was other people named the 49ers as some of their biggest disappointments. They seem snake bit from a injury perspective, Jimmy G is always getting hurt, and that's part of the reason why they drafted Trey Lance when they did. But they've had other injuries that always keep them from. But everybody's got injuries, and they have a way of dealing with them. I mean, look, even last week or this past Sunday, the Arizona Cardinals didn't have Kyler Murray, DeAndre Hopkins, AJ Green, or Chase Edmonds. And they're on the road in San Francisco and put up 400 yards and 30 plus points with Colt McCoy. But they're built the right way. I know Shanahan and Lynch are in lockstep, but even people there in the building have told me that they're kind of scratching their heads as to why their offense hasn't had better rhythm. They really thought that things were going to be better. Losing Salah, I think, was big. For their defense. And Miko Ryans is, young, he's still learning, and, that'll take a little time. But Kyle really has got to get them,
they've got
to be in the mix. They were supposed to be contending for the division this year. And now doesn't look like that's going to happen. And it looked like, okay, they made it to the Super Bowl, and then there's the big drop off. And I think that has helped, buy him some time, because you saw what the potential could be. But eventually that starts running out. So you've got to get this thing turned around pretty quickly and have a strong end to the season. I'm not saying he's going to get fired this year, but if they don't have a strong end to this season, then next year you never know if he could be on the hot seat there, because that wasn't like a 6-year contract that he signed.
Is Jimmy G a guy that how hard should teams look at him? And like, what is the opinion of him from people you talk to?
I think that he's a solid guy. People see him as that. I don't think anybody sees him as a franchise savior, but if you have a strong roster around him, he's a serviceable guy. I think, that could be, an option, somebody that you look at. I mean, there was talk that, you're wondering, hey, would the Patriots bring him back, and then they could keep rolling. So there was, in the right system, he can be very effective if he can stay healthy. Again,
that's a huge issue for him.
That's the big issue for him. So ability wise, yes. But again, how they say your best ability is availability.
Yeah, right.
And, that's the question about him.
Well, Mike, now that we've depressed Washington fans, it's time to go.
Exactly. But I think they're probably used to it right now.
Yeah. And like I said, I mean, there's always a way. Like, listen, when Jay was here, there were teams that they built that I thought, with better coaching, this is a 10 or 11 win team. And you know what I mean? And so, like, can you get there? I do think you can get there. Can you sustain it? Then that's a culture thing that starts from the top down, and that's why I say, like, there are always ways that you can get there, because we've seen it for blips on this, at a time, like with Joe Gibbs, but it's still,
sustaining it is the key. And that's the key. Complacent, because remember that year that Bruce Allen said we thought we were better than what we were. And so you have to find a way to continue to build, and not just be like, oh, well, let's just keep things the way they are. You got to continue to find a way to.
Well, that's why, like, that year they should have traded Kirk in the offseason, but they thought they're 8-7-1. You think, and then listen, Alex Smith was not a bad trade. He got hurt. And like, I don't know that he fit Jay completely, but if he stays healthy, they're a 10, they could be a 10-11 win team the next year.
Smart guy on the field. And
so there are, like, and there's been some really, really bad luck involved as well. But the problem here is, like, you've got to hit on those to give yourself a chance. And that's what they have done. And I will say, like, even this offseason, I know from talking to them throughout the offseason that they still felt like, to be a true contender, it was another year or two. And that's why I think if they felt like they were really close, they'd have been more aggressive going after a guy, whether giving more for Matthew Stafford or moving up to get a Fields or a Mac Jones or someone like that. But we'll see. Back to it again this offseason. We'll have the same conversation in February, right before free agency. And, there we go. So, Mike, thanks a lot, and enjoy the rest of the season.
All right, man. Thanks for having me.
That's it for this episode. Thanks to Mike for joining me, and thanks to you, as always, for listening and for sticking with the show. I'll be back with another episode Thursday night. Talk to you next time.